A woman reads as she waits in line to vote in Atlanta. People waited as long as 6 hours to cast ballots in Georgia on Tuesday. AP photo, John Bazemore.
Even the act of voting has become a partisan issue with racial implications in 2020.
Republicans are far more likely than Democrats to say they're willing to vote in person during a pandemic, while Democrats outpace Republicans in wanting to vote by mail, according to new Politico Morning Consult poll, which also shows racial differences as well.
The reasons for the partisan split became clear during Tuesday's troubled election in Georgia as well as Wisconsin's controversial April 7 primary. It's also playing out in federal court cases in battleground states where Democrats are demanding more mail-in voting opportunities while Republicans resist.
The challenge of having an election during a pandemic, and the resulting partisan division over how to do it, poses particular problems for Democrats, however, because of issues of geography and race.
Coronavirus spreads more easily in densely populated urban areas, where Democrats tend to outnumber Republicans, and has proved to be more deadly to African Americans and Hispanics, who vote for Democrats by bigger margins. On top of that one-two punch, the threat of coronavirus has led to precinct closures that load up voters at combined polling stations, often in urban or Democratic areas.
In Tuesday's primary in Georgia, people waited as long as 6 hours to cast ballots due to a combination of long lines at combined precincts and voting machine failures. The problems were most pronounced in areas with large numbers of African Americans. There would likely have been more black voters physically at the polls, but many voted by mail, overcoming a wariness many have with entrusting their ballots to the U.S. Postal Service.
A lot of black voters want to cast their ballots in person, to see it go into the ballot box because they don't trust the mail, said Cliff Albright, founder of Atlanta-based Black Voters Matter, a mobilization and outreach group that operates throughout the Southeast.
According to the Politico Morning Consult poll, only 28% of Democrats said they'd vote in person at the polls, compared with 63% of Republicans who are ready to do so if social distancing requirements are still in place in November. When it comes to mail-in voting, though, Democrats outpace Republicans in support by 67% to 33%, the poll shows.
That feeling about mail-in voting is changing because more and more people don't want to go to the polls and get sick from coronavirus and die, Albright said. But some people didn't get their absentee ballots. It happened to my son. It took him 6 hours to early vote on Friday. So there's this overlapping Venn diagram of the deadliness of coronavirus overlapping with long lines at the polling place and problems just getting an absentee ballot to cast.
Coronavirus-related precinct closures and other troubles that disproportionately affected Democrats weren't isolated to Georgia. They also marred battleground presidential primaries in Florida, Arizona and Illinois on March 15 and Wisconsin's controversial April 7 primary. And in Pennsylvania, voters had 77% fewer precincts in which to cast a ballot June 2 in Philadelphia.
The Politico Morning Consult poll underscores the observation by Albright and others who have seen a surge of interest in mail-in voting among African Americans.
The poll showed that 54% of black voters said they would prefer to vote by mail during the pandemic, compared with 28% who said they would still go to the polling station in person. By 49% to 44%, whites would prefer to vote by mail than in person during a pandemic, and by 43% to 38%, Hispanics would prefer in person to mail-in voting.
Overall, voters favored mail-in voting over in-person voting by 50% to 41%.
Bob Stein, a political scientist and pollster with Rice University, said there's been a clear shift in support for mail-in voting among Democratic voters since the coronavirus epidemic began. There has also been a corresponding decrease in support among Republicans. In the midst of conducting a 1,000-sample poll in Houston's Harris County, Stein said, he saw support for mail-in voting drop 7 percentage points among Republicans who previously had voted by mail when Trump began criticizing mail-in voting.
I've never seen anything like it, Stein said.
While mail-in voting can be more fraud-prone than in-person voting, voter fraud is exceedingly rare and seldom tips the results of major elections, according to experts and reviews of elections. Trump, who has voted by mail himself in Florida, has also indicated that a big concern he has with a Democratic bill in Congress concerning more mail-in voting and other election issues was that, if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again.
The Politico Morning Consult poll shows that 33% of voters overall thought Democrats would be mostly helped by allowing all voters to cast mail-in ballots. Only 6% believed it would advantage Republicans more and 37% said it would help neither party more than the other.
When it comes to party identification, 47% of Republicans believed all mail balloting would mostly help Democrats, compared with 27% of Democrats and 25% of independents who think this, the poll showed.
Republican fears were also more pronounced than that of independents and Democrats when respondents were asked which statement they agreed with more: should the U.S. allow all voters to cast mail-in ballots due to the coronavirus, or should this not be allowed because it jeopardizes election security?
The poll showed 34% of Republicans said they would favor expanded mail-in balloting while 58% said they were more concerned with security. But 81% of Democrats and 56% of independents favored the expansion of mail-in voting while 10% of Democrats and 28% of independents were more concerned with security. Overall, voters favor mail-in voting in this scenario by 58% to 31%.
Voting by mail, however, can sound easier than it is. First-time voters tend to get tripped up by certain signature and verification requirements that can vary from state to state.
The first time you do anything you're going to make mistakes, said political scientist Christopher Mann of Skidmore College, who studies mail-in voting.
In Florida, which requires that signatures on mail-in ballot envelopes match the voter's signature on file with the county election supervisor, first-time voters have their ballots rejected at higher rates than experienced voters, who tend to be older, white and Republican, according to research by the University of Florida's Dan Smith.
Democrats from Florida to Pennsylvania have taken heart in increases over Republicans in voter registration and mail-in voting requests, but Democrats often have lower return rates than Republicans.
Converting those requests to actual votes is where the real work begins, and it's a lot harder to do than it sounds, said Ryan Tyson, a Republican consultant from Florida.
The Florida and National Democratic parties say they've invested more money in outreach and education for voters that includes specialized instruction to help walk people through the process of requesting and properly voting a mail-in ballot.
Still, Democrats lost a special congressional election in California that was overwhelmingly all-mail. Democrats had a registration advantage over Republicans of 6.6 percentage points in California's 25th congressional district, but the GOP returned more ballots.
Joe Biden supporters are barely intense enough to tweet about him, said Representative Matt Gaetz, R. Florida. The president's supporters would gargle coronavirus-flavored ginger ale while waiting in a line to vote for him.
However, Trump trails Biden in nearly every national and most battleground state polls, including Florida.
Heading into Tuesday's primary in Pennsylvania, conservatives were crowing that Democrats were underperforming for Biden because more people were voting for Trump in the uncontested Republican primary compared to the Democratic contest. But Biden wound up getting 10% more votes than Trump. Democrats also point out that the turnout was huge in Georgia. And, in the April 7 Wisconsin primary, Democrats came out in force and won a contested state Supreme Court seat.
Democrats' Wisconsin win came despite major troubles for black voters in Milwaukee, where all but 5 of 180 precincts closed due to coronavirus. In heavily black precincts, the total number of ballots cast between the February Supreme Court primary and the April 7 race increased by less than 40%, while overall ballots in the state rose 119%, according to an analysis by Democratic data consultant Matt Isbell.
A return of coronavirus and the voter suppression that can happen with black and urban voters could swing the general election in Wisconsin, Isbell said. That's true, he said. In other battleground states like Michigan, Pennsylvania or Florida, which Trump also carried narrowly in 2016.
What we saw happen in Wisconsin, in Philadelphia, in Georgia is a warning sign, Isbell said. We need to get every Democrat an absentee ballot and make sure they cast it the right way.
Morning Consult is a global data intelligence company, delivering insights on what people think in real time by surveying tens of thousands across the globe every single day. More details on the poll and its methodology can be found in these two documents, top lines, crosstabs.